It's been a weekend of partying for the people of Tokyo, the city chosen to host the 2020 Olympics. But just 3 hours north, the celebrations couldn't be further away. Almost 2.5 years have passed since Fukushima was shaken by an earthquake, battered by a tsunami, and finally choked with fear as they watched their nuclear reactor melt down. But today, their problems are far from over.
There are constant leaks into the ground and into the sea. There are 4 melted reactors.
It's a massive long-term issue for the area and for Japan more broadly.
In the past 2 months, the Tokyo Electric Power Company has admitted that the nuclear plant is leaking an Olympic-sized pool of radioactive material into the Pacific Ocean every 8 days.
The government and TEPCO handled this disaster very poorly since the word go. The radiation has been going into the ocean for a long time and it hasn't been acknowledged.
Tuna containing Fukushima fallout have been caught off the coast of California, so it's a problem not just for Japan but for the world.
The government has now thrown more than $500 million towards building an underground wall of ice to contain the problem.
I think this is simply to portray a more positive image internationally of Japan, that action is being taken with the goal of getting Tokyo the 2020 Olympics.
While people who lived within a 20-kilometre radius of the disaster have been relocated, for many who live just outside, they have little choice but to stay.
There's the fear of radiation in the long term, and those effects will be slow and insidious with cancer and other chronic diseases.
So, with the Olympics just 7 years away, can Japan lift its game? Not just for the safety of the athletes, but for the safety of their own people.
Nicole Livingstone is an Olympian and a board member of the Australian Olympic Committee. Nicole, do you think hosting an Olympics is good for putting pressure on companies like Japan to do more to sort out their domestic issues?
Well, certainly it gives the opportunity for a lot of infrastructure to be built within an Olympic city. In terms of Tokyo itself, it wasn't unnoticed the fact that 2 years ago Fukushima and the nuclear disaster that took place is still an issue for the country of Japan, given that it was directly asked about by the International Olympic Committee to the Japanese Prime Minister. His answer was that Fukushima has never affected Tokyo and never will.
Well, the Japanese are right in that, Nicole. I mean, I went for the project to that region that was affected by the tsunami. I went to Fukushima on the bullet train. It's nowhere near Tokyo. I mean, this is really more of a PR problem for the Japanese than anything else, isn't it?
Well, they're a very humble race. If you've been there, which you have, Steve, you understand that they are very embarrassed by anything that goes wrong. So they haven't been exactly forthcoming with communicating a lot of things to do with Fukushima. In reading about the radiation fallout, they actually tested 95% of school-aged children in a village just 50 kilometres away from the nuclear disaster, and they in fact found that 100% of those children had no levels at all of radiation.
Now, Nick, the next Olympics are in Rio. They've got massive problems with crime. I mean, there's never been a perfectly Olympic city. I mean, Sydney back in 2000, Steve Price was living there. I mean, it's never going to be perfect, is it?
Well, it's getting harder to find the perfect Olympic city, and in fact Tokyo was up against Istanbul and Madrid. Now Istanbul, or Turkey, actually shares a border with Syria, so that made it very difficult to select Turkey to have the Olympic Games, and Madrid and Spain in particular have been affected by the global financial crisis, and as all of Europe has. So it's getting more difficult, and it's not like Asia hasn't hosted the Olympic Games before, with Beijing in 2008 and Seoul in 1988. So the biggest selling point for Japan was it is in safe hands.
As an Olympian, Nick, what do you think of the idea that eventually we're going to get to the point where no one city can host an Olympic Games? It's too big, too expensive, and what you simply do is run all of the individual sports in different cities. Like you have, say, the Sydney would have the swimming, you might have the athletics in Tokyo, you might have the bike riding in France. What about that?
I would hate to think that the Olympic Games ends up being just a glorified World Championships of different sports. The whole thing about having a multi-sport event is to have everybody, 10,500 athletes together in the one village.
And Nick, how can swimmers hook up with gymnasts if they're in different cities?
That's actually an interesting mix, Husey. I've never thought about gymnasts. Well done.
Well, always good to chat, Nick. Thanks for your time. Thanks.
Well, we're going to take a break. We'll be back very shortly. Don't go anywhere.
Coming up, pop it on the list. How a